Ethan Parker's feet pounded rhythmically against the pavement as he jogged through Central Park, the cool morning air filling his lungs with each determined breath. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues across the sprawling green landscape, illuminating the laughter of children and the chatter of families enjoying their day. For Ethan, a billionaire whose life was meticulously curated, this early morning run served as both a ritual and an escape. In the chaos of board meetings and corporate decisions, the park was his sanctuary, a place where he could momentarily forget the pressures of wealth and responsibility. As he navigated the familiar paths, Ethan's gaze drifted to the vibrant colors of blooming flowers and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Yet, amidst this beauty, something caught his attention. A figure seated on a weathered bench, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. The man was disheveled, clad in tattered clothes that spoke of neglect and hardship. His unkempt hair fell over his face, obscuring the expression underneath, but Ethan could sense a profound sadness radiating from him. Intrigued, Ethan slowed his pace, allowing himself to observe this stranger. There was an undeniable contrast between their worlds. Here he was, a man of immense fortune and power, running through a park filled with life and laughter, while this man appeared to be trapped in his own sorrow, isolated in a sea of people. Ethan's heart stirred with an inexplicable sense of empathy, a feeling that pulled him closer to the bench, as if an invisible thread connected their disparate lives. He continued jogging, but his thoughts remained tethered to the man on the bench. The next day, he found himself drawn back to the park, as if by a magnetic force. Ethan observed Henry. He'd mentally named the man. Sitting in the same spot, his vacant gaze fixed on the ground as if searching for something lost. This time, Ethan slowed his pace even further, allowing himself to take in the details. The worn-out sneakers, the dirt-streaked hands, and the deep lines etched into Henry's face, each one telling a story of struggle and despair. "What brings you here every day?" Ethan muttered under his breath, curiosity gnawing at him. He had never been one to engage with strangers, especially those on the fringes of society, yet here he was, captivated by a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was a stark reminder of how far removed he was from the struggles that many face daily. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's routine became intertwined with Henry's presence in the park. He would jog, then walk, all the while stealing glances at the man whose sorrowful demeanor had become a constant in his life. There was something about Henry that felt hauntingly familiar, a connection that Ethan couldn't quite rationalize. One afternoon, as he leaned against a tree to catch his breath, Ethan's contemplation was interrupted by the sound of rustling leaves. He looked up to find a squirrel scurrying up a nearby tree, but his eyes were quickly drawn back to Henry. The man's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with what appeared to be an old photograph. Ethan squinted, trying to catch a glimpse of the image, but Henry quickly tucked it away, his expression darkening. "Why do you keep coming back?" Ethan found himself whispering to the wind, though he knew the question was meant for Henry, who remained oblivious. It was an odd feeling, being so invested in someone else's life without ever having spoken a word to him. The thought nagged at Ethan, pushing him to consider the possibility of reaching out, of bridging the gap between their worlds. Finally, one crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to act. He felt a surge of determination as he approached the bench where Henry sat. The man looked older up close, his skin weathered and pale, but his eyes held a flicker of life that sparked Ethan's resolve. He took a deep breath, summoning the courage he usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. "Hi there," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I'm Ethan. I've seen you here quite a bit." He forced a smile, hoping to break through the invisible wall that seemed to surround Henry. Henry turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the well-dressed man before him. "What do you want?" His voice was rough, as if it hadn't been used in days. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just thought I could help. I have some food and a little cash. Maybe you could use it?" He dug into his pocket, feeling the crisp bills against his fingers. Henry's gaze flickered between Ethan and the offered money, a mix of recognition and pain flickering across his features. He shook his head, a pained expression settling on his face. "You wouldn't understand," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan froze, caught off guard by the response. "What do you mean?" he asked, confusion knitting his brow. "I just want to help." "Help?" Henry scoffed, bitterness lacing his tone. "You think a couple of dollars and some food can change anything? You think it's that simple?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, to explain that it was more than just money, that he wanted to offer companionship, understanding. But the words tangled in his throat. He felt a deep sense of shock wash over him. This was not how he had envisioned this encounter. Ethan stammered, feeling the weight of Henry's rejection settle heavily on his shoulders. For a man used to getting what he wanted, this was an unfamiliar sensation, one that left him both bewildered and vulnerable. Henry's eyes softened for a fleeting moment before hardening again, the walls he had built around himself rising higher. "Just leave me be, okay? You don't know anything about me," he muttered, turning his gaze back to the ground. Ethan took a step back, the reality of the encounter sinking in. He had wanted to make a difference, to reach out to someone in need, but instead, he felt more lost than ever. As he turned to leave, a whirlwind of emotions swirled within him. Confusion, frustration, and a flicker of determination ignited by Henry's words. What did Henry mean by "you wouldn't understand"? There was something deeper at play here, something Ethan felt compelled to uncover. He glanced back at Henry, whose head was now bowed, obscuring his face from view. "Maybe I don't understand," Ethan murmured to himself, "but I will." With that thought echoing in his mind, he jogged away, the image of Henry etched into his memory, and a newfound mission taking root in his heart. Ethan Parker lay awake in his spacious, meticulously designed bedroom, the city lights flickering through the large windows like distant stars. Despite the comfort of his luxurious surroundings, a veil of turmoil enveloped his mind. He couldn't shake off the haunting words of the disheveled man he had encountered in Central Park. "You wouldn't understand." The phrase echoed in his mind, a ghost that refused to be silenced. He turned onto his side, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his privileged life pressing down on him. Ethan was accustomed to solving problems, whether in business or in his personal life, but this was different. Henry, the man he had observed day after day, was not a problem to be fixed. He was a complex, living enigma, and Ethan felt drawn to him in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. Rising from his bed, Ethan slipped into a pair of sweatpants and a hoodie, the fabric soft against his skin. He padded to his kitchen and filled a mug with steaming coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. As he sipped the bitter liquid, he felt an insatiable urge to understand Henry's plight, to learn about the struggles that had led him to that park bench day after day. The news reports about homelessness in New York City flooded his mind. He recalled stories of men and women who had once held dreams, ambitions, and families. It occurred to him that he lived in a bubble of wealth and success, blind to the suffering that lay just beyond his carefully curated life. Ethan's heart ached at the thought of Henry, a man who had lost so much, sitting alone in the park, wrapped in his sorrow. Determined, Ethan decided he would not let this opportunity pass. He reached for his laptop and began researching homelessness in the city, poring over statistics, articles, and personal stories. The more he read, the more he realized that Henry was not just another statistic. He was a human being with a past, with pain and dreams that had gone unfulfilled. The sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the city, awakening it from its slumber. Ethan's resolve solidified. He gathered his thoughts, crafting a plan to help Henry, not just with money, but with dignity and respect. He wanted to offer friendship, a lifeline to a man who seemed lost in the shadows. The following day, Ethan returned to Central Park armed with more than just cash. He carried a bag filled with essentials, warm clothes, nutritious food, and a heartfelt letter he had written during the night. The letter spoke of empathy, understanding, and an offer of friendship, not charity. He wanted Henry to know that he saw him, not as a charity case, but as a person worthy of connection. As Ethan approached the familiar bench, his heart raced with anticipation. He scanned the area, searching for the man who had sparked an unexpected transformation in him. But to his dismay, the bench was empty. Ethan's heart sank. He felt a knot of disappointment tightening in his chest. Where could he be? Ethan muttered to himself, glancing around the park. He hoped that Henry had not given up on visiting his usual spot, but the park felt different today, emptier, somehow. Ethan wandered through the park, the sounds of laughter and chatter from families enjoying the sunny day contrasting sharply with his own sense of loss. He approached a park attendant, an elderly man with kind eyes, hoping for some information. "Excuse me," Ethan began. "I'm looking for a man who usually sits on this bench. He's disheveled, with a beard and worn clothes. Have you seen him today?" The attendant scratched his head thoughtfully. "You mean Henry? He's been coming here for years. I haven't seen him in a couple of days, though. Hope he's all right." Ethan's chest tightened at the mention of Henry's name. "Do you know where he usually goes?" The attendant sighed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Sometimes he goes to the shelter down on Fifth Avenue, but mostly he just wanders." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. The shelter. It was a lead, but also a sense of urgency washed over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had a responsibility now, a duty to reach out to Henry. As he left the park, the weight of disappointment hung over him, but he refused to let it deter him. If Henry wasn't in the park, he would find him elsewhere. Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found a private investigator he had used in the past for business matters. "Hello, Rick," Ethan said when the line connected. "I need your help finding someone." Rick, a seasoned investigator with a raspy voice, replied, "Sure thing, Ethan. Who are we looking for?" "A man named Henry. He's homeless, and I think he might be in a shelter. I need you to help me find him." There was a pause on the line, and Ethan could almost hear the gears turning in Rick's mind. "You're getting involved with a homeless guy? You know that's a slippery slope, right?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't care. Just help me find him." Rick chuckled lightly, sensing the urgency in Ethan's voice. "All right, I'll see what I can do. I'll get back to you in a few days." Ethan hung up, feeling a mix of determination and hope. He knew he couldn't give up on Henry, not now. He had already felt an inexplicable bond with the man, and he wanted to help him find a way back to a better life. Days passed, and the city continued to buzz with life. Ethan's heart raced with anticipation every time his phone buzzed, hoping it would be news from Rick. He immersed himself in work, but his mind often drifted back to Henry. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan received a call from Rick. "I found him," Rick said, his voice steady. "He's been spotted at a shelter on Fifth Avenue. They usually keep a low profile, but I have an address for you." Ethan's heart leaped, and he felt a rush of adrenaline. "Thank you, Rick. I'll head there right now." As he made his way to the shelter, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. He envisioned a scenario where he would find Henry, where he could finally offer the friendship and support he believed the man needed. But as he approached the entrance, doubt began to creep in. What if Henry rejected him again? What if he wasn't ready to accept help? Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed the door open and stepped into the dimly lit shelter. A wave of warmth enveloped him, mingling with the sense of food and humanity. He scanned the room, looking for a familiar face, his heart pounding in his chest. "Excuse me," he called out to a staff member behind the reception desk. "I'm looking for a man named Henry. He's homeless and might come here." The woman behind the desk nodded, her expression softening. "Henry? Yes, he's here. He usually keeps to himself, but I can take you to him." Ethan followed her through the bustling shelter, his heart racing as they walked past rows of cots and tables filled with people sharing meals. The atmosphere was one of resilience, of survival, and he felt a surge of admiration for those who fought their battles daily. They reached a small room at the back of the shelter, and the staff member gestured for Ethan to enter. "He's in there. Good luck." Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped inside. There, sitting on a cot with his head bowed, was Henry. The sight of him sent a rush of emotions through Ethan: relief, concern, and an overwhelming desire to help. "Henry," Ethan said softly, taking a step closer. Henry lifted his head, his eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with a mix of confusion and wariness. "I've been looking for you," Ethan said, his heart pounding. "I wanted to help. I brought some things for you." Henry shook his head, the pain evident in his features. "You shouldn't have come here. I don't need anything from you." Ethan's heart sank, but he refused to back down. "I know you don't want charity, but I want to offer you friendship. You don't have to do this alone." Henry's eyes flickered with vulnerability, torn between his instinct to push Ethan away and the longing for connection that he had suppressed for so long. "I appreciate your concern, but you don't understand," Henry replied, his voice heavy with unshed tears. "Then help me understand," Ethan urged, stepping closer. "I want to be here for you, no matter what. Just let me in." In that moment, Ethan realized that this was just the beginning of a journey neither of them had anticipated. A journey toward understanding, healing, and perhaps even redemption. Ethan Parker sat in his expansive, modern office overlooking the bustling streets of Manhattan, yet his mind was far from the board meetings and investment strategies that usually dominated his thoughts. Instead, he found himself lost in contemplation about Henry, the disheveled man he had encountered in Central Park. A week had passed since their last interaction, and during that time, Ethan had delved deeply into the world of homelessness, driven by an inexplicable urge to understand Henry's plight. The private investigator, a grizzled man named Frank, had delivered the news that shook Ethan to his core. Henry, he learned, had once been a successful artist, celebrated and adored in the art community. His name had graced gallery walls, and his pieces had fetched impressive sums at auctions. But a succession of personal tragedies, losses compounded by addiction and betrayal, had led him to the dark streets of New York, where he now sat on a park bench, a shadow of his former self. As Ethan processed the investigator's report, his heart ached with empathy. He imagined Henry in his prime, vibrant and full of life, creating art that spoke to the soul. Now, that same man seemed trapped in a cycle of despair. Ethan found himself feeling an overwhelming sense of duty. He needed to find Henry and help him reclaim whatever pieces of his life still remained. Determination coursed through him as he made his way back to Central Park that evening. The sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, casting a warm golden glow across the park. He scanned the familiar benches, hoping to find the man who had unknowingly ignited a spark of compassion in him. His heart raced as he spotted Henry near the same spot where they had first crossed paths, the man's silhouette framed by the soft light of dusk. "Henry," Ethan called out, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The figure on the bench turned slowly, and Ethan could see the flicker of recognition in Henry's eyes. However, it was quickly replaced by a guarded expression. Henry's disheveled hair fell into his face as he shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping the edge of the bench tightly. "What do you want?" Henry asked, his tone sharp, laced with defensiveness. "I just want to talk," Ethan replied, his voice softer now, imbued with sincerity. "I've learned some things about you, and I want to help," Henry scoffed, shaking his head. "Help? You think you can just swoop in and fix everything? You have no idea what I've been through." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Henry's bitterness wash over him. "Maybe not, but I want to understand. I've been reading about your past, about the art you used to create. You were talented, Henry. You had a gift." "Gift?" Henry's voice rose, laced with sarcasm. "And where did that gift get me? Look at me. I'm a nobody now, just a washed-up artist sitting on a bench in Central Park. You think your money can change that?" Ethan felt a pang of frustration, but he quickly quelled it. "I'm not here to throw money at you. I want to help you find a way back to your art, back to a life you can be proud of. You don't have to do this alone." Henry looked away, his expression a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You don't get it. I'm unworthy of help. You don't know the things I've done, the people I've hurt. No amount of kindness can erase that." Ethan took a step closer, his heart racing with urgency. "We all make mistakes, Henry. I've faced my challenges too. We can't move forward if we're stuck in the past. Let me show you that there's still hope." Henry clenched his fists, visibly shaken by Ethan's words. "Hope? You think I can just pick up the pieces after everything? I've lost everything that mattered to me. I don't even know who I am anymore. Then let's figure it out together, Ethan urged, his voice steady and filled with conviction. I've been through tough times too. I lost my mother when I was young, and it took me years to understand how to cope with that loss. I had to find my own path. I can help you find yours. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the sounds of the park fading into the background. Henry's eyes flickered with uncertainty, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. He looked up at Ethan, searching the man's face for any sign of insincerity. All he found was resolve. I don't want to be a burden, Henry finally whispered, his voice barely audible. I've lost everyone I ever cared about. What makes you think I deserve a second chance? Because everyone deserves a second chance, Henry, Ethan replied, his voice firm yet gentle. I believe in redemption. I believe in starting over. And I believe that you still have the strength to fight for your life. Henry's gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment, Ethan thought he had lost him again. But just as he prepared to back away, Henry spoke, his voice trembling. Why are you doing this? You could easily ignore me, walk past like everyone else. Ethan took a deep breath, his chest tightening with emotion. Because I see you, Henry. I see the man you once were, and I refuse to let that man fade away without a fight. You have so much to offer the world, and I want to help you find a way to share that again. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows behind them, a flicker of hope ignited in Henry's eyes. What if I fail? What if I can't go back to who I was? Then we'll figure it out together, Ethan assured him, a reassuring smile breaking through. I'll be right here, every step of the way. Henry looked up, searching Ethan's face for any hint of deception, but all he found was sincerity. You really mean that? I do, Ethan nodded. I know this will be hard, but I promise you, it's worth it. You're worth it. With an uncertain breath, Henry nodded slowly, the walls around his heart beginning to crack. Okay, I'll try. Ethan's heart soared at the sound of those words. That's all I ask. Just give yourself a chance, and let me help you. In that moment, beneath the fading light of the day, two men stood on the precipice of change. One, a billionaire who had built his life on success and wealth. The other, a man who had lost everything but was just beginning to see the glimmer of hope. There, on that park bench, a fragile bond began to form, one that hinted at redemption, healing, and the possibility of a fresh start. Ethan Parker stood before Henry, the disheveled figure on the park bench, his heart pounding with a mix of determination and empathy. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the vibrant green grass, but the warmth of the day lingered in the air. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he hoped would pierce through Henry's hardened exterior. I know it's hard to believe, but I was once in a dark place too, Ethan began, his voice steady yet soft. He could see the flicker of interest in Henry's eyes, a fleeting moment where the walls seemed to crack just a little. I grew up in a small town, and my family struggled to make ends meet. My father worked 2 jobs, and my mother, well, she was always working too. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Still, there were days when I felt completely alone. Henry shifted slightly on the bench, his gaze flicking away momentarily, as if processing Ethan's words. The sunlight caught the deep lines on his face, a map of pain and lost years. Ethan pressed on, determined to reach him. When I was a teenager, I lost my mother to an illness. It shattered my world. I was angry, lost. I didn't know how to cope, and I pushed everyone away. I thought I didn't need anyone, but I was wrong. Henry's expression remained guarded, but Ethan could sense a slight softening, a willingness to listen. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and shared pain. Ethan continued, I worked hard to turn my life around. I channeled my grief into my studies and eventually started my own business. But it wasn't just the success that healed me. It was the connections I made along the way. Friends, mentors, they became my family. That's great for you, Henry replied, his tone flat, yet Ethan could hear the tremor beneath it. But you don't understand. You had people around you. I didn't. I lost everything. His voice cracked, and for a brief moment, Ethan glimpsed the man beneath the layers of sorrow and despair. "What do you mean you lost everything?" Ethan asked gently, taking a step closer, as if to bridge the gap between their worlds. "You still have a chance to find something again. You don't have to be alone." Henry's eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind them. "You think I want help from someone like you? Someone who has it all figured out? You don't know the first thing about being abandoned, Ethan." The name slipped from Henry's lips like a bitter pill. Ethan's heart sank at the realization that Henry had not just lost material possessions, but had deep emotional wounds that ran far deeper. "I may have been fortunate in some ways," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I've had my share of abandonment too. I lost my mother, and my father, well, he was never really there for me. He was too wrapped up in his own world, his business, his life. I had to learn to fend for myself." He paused, gauging Henry's reaction. Henry looked at him, his expression a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "And you think that makes you special? Everyone has their struggles. Mine just happened to take everything from me. Family, friends, they turned their backs when I needed them the most." He swallowed hard, and Ethan could see the pain etched in the lines of his face. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. "I can't pretend to know your pain, Henry, but I do know that healing is possible. It starts with reaching out, with allowing someone to help." Ethan took another step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me help you, please." Henry shook his head, a bitter smile curling his lips. "You think you can just swoop in and save me? Life doesn't work that way. You don't understand what I've been through." Desperation sparked within Ethan, urging him to dig deeper. "What if I told you that I want to help not because you're a project for me, but because I see a person worth saving? I see someone who has a story, someone who deserves a second chance." He hesitated, then added, "You have a family, don't you? You mentioned it once before." Henry's expression darkened further, the shadows of his past looming larger. "Family? What family? They abandoned me when I needed them. I was left to fend for myself in a world that didn't care." Ethan's heart twisted at the sorrow in Henry's voice. "But that doesn't mean you don't deserve help or that you should give up. There's still hope out there, Henry. You can find a place to stay, a job. You could even reconnect with your family if you wanted." A flicker of something, anger, sadness, or perhaps both, passed over Henry's face. "You don't get it. They don't want me back. I was a burden to them. I lost everything because of my mistakes, and they made it clear they wanted nothing to do with me afterward." Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. It hurt to see Henry so broken, so resistant to the possibility of redemption. "I can help you find a place to stay, help you get back on your feet," he urged, trying to keep the hope alive in his voice. "You don't have to face this alone." Henry's silence was deafening, his gaze locked on the ground. The weight of his past seemed to suffocate the space between them. "I don't need saving," he finally said, his voice low but steady. "I just need to be left alone." Ethan took a step back, respecting Henry's need for space, but inside, he felt a fire igniting. He could see the pain in Henry's eyes, the longing for connection buried beneath layers of hurt. "I understand," he said softly, "but I won't give up. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you'll think about what I said." Henry's eyes flicked up, a spark of defiance meeting Ethan's steady gaze. "You're wasting your time. I'm not worth saving." Ethan shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. Everyone is worth saving, including you. I'll be here, Henry, every day if I have to. You're not alone unless you choose to be." With that, Ethan turned and walked away, leaving Henry alone on the bench, the shadows of his past swirling around him like a storm. As he made his way through the park, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he had only scratched the surface of Henry's story. He felt a deep sense of purpose growing within him, a determination to break through the barriers that had been erected around Henry's heart. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but something told him that Henry's story was intertwined with his own in ways he had yet to understand. And as he stepped out of the park, he vowed to return, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan Parker stood at the edge of Central Park, his heart racing with an unusual mix of anxiety and determination. The previous day's encounter with Henry had left a profound impact on him, and he felt an almost magnetic pull to return. He looked out over the park, his eyes scanning the familiar paths, benches, and trees. But there was no sign of the disheveled man whose sorrowful demeanor had captivated him. The absence of Henry sent a wave of panic coursing through him. Where could he be? Ethan muttered to himself, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He had come to see the park as a sanctuary, a place where he could escape the relentless pressures of his corporate empire, but it had transformed into a place of worry. He remembered Henry's face, the look of resignation mingled with a flicker of something deeper. Pain, perhaps. Ethan walked slowly, taking in the vibrant colors of autumn leaves, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the couple strolling hand in hand. Yet, all he could feel was the gnawing concern for Henry. He approached the bench where he had first seen him, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that he might find him there again, waiting. The bench sat empty, a stark reminder of the man who had captured his curiosity and compassion. Just as he was about to leave, a familiar figure caught his eye. In the distance, he spotted a worn-out baseball cap and a long, tattered coat. It was Henry. He was standing in front of a nearby shelter, a place Ethan had overlooked in his search. Relief flooded over him, but it quickly morphed into determination. This was his chance to reach out once again. Ethan approached cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the soft grass. "Henry," he called out, his voice steady but edged with urgency. Henry turned, his expression unreadable. The moment their eyes met, Ethan felt a jolt of recognition, an understanding that transcended words. Henry's face, though lined with hardship, was alive with emotion. "What do you want, Ethan?" Henry's voice was rough, each word carrying the weight of years spent burdened by shadows. "I want to help you," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "I know it sounds cliché, but I mean it. I can't stop thinking about you. I want to understand what you're going through." Henry shook his head, the movement almost imperceptible. "You don't understand," he said, his tone heavy with resignation. "You live in a world of money and success. I'm not worth your time." Ethan felt a pang at those words. "That's not true," he insisted, his voice firm. "I've seen a glimpse of the pain you carry, and it matters to me. You matter. You're not just a story to me. You're a person. Please, let me in." Henry hesitated, his eyes darting away as if trying to escape the conversation. "You don't know anything about my past," he replied quietly, his voice becoming barely above a whisper. "I don't need to know everything right now," Ethan said, his heart pounding in his chest. "But I want to help you, Henry. Let's take it one step at a time. Just talk to me, whatever you're comfortable with." The silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Henry sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to release some of the tension in the air. "Fine," he said reluctantly, "but I won't be discussing my past. It's complicated." Ethan nodded eagerly, relief washing over him. "That's okay. We can talk about anything else. How about what you enjoy? Your art, maybe? I know you were once an artist." Henry's gaze softened momentarily at the mention of art, but just as quickly, it hardened again. "Art was a long time ago. It's not something I think about anymore." "Why not?" Ethan pressed gently, sensing a fragile opportunity. "You have talent. You shouldn't let it go to waste." "I can't afford to think about what I used to have," Henry snapped, his frustration bubbling over. "All I see is what's in front of me now. Survival is all that matters." Ethan took a step back, allowing Henry a moment to breathe. "I get that, but maybe there's a way to survive and still hold on to parts of who you were. You don't have to bury everything." Henry's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. "You're naive," he said, though his voice lacked the bite it had before. "You think it's that simple?" "No, I don't think it's simple," Ethan replied earnestly, "but I believe there's hope. Even in the darkest places, there's a way out. I want to be that light for you, if you'll let me." For a moment, Henry regarded Ethan with an intensity that made the billionaire's heart race. "Why do you care?" he finally asked, his voice low. "What's in it for you?" Ethan paused, weighing his response. "I care because I see something in you that's worth saving." I see a person who has been through hell and back. I know what it's like to feel lost. Henry's eyes searched Ethan's face for sincerity. You don't know me, he said softly, almost pleading. Then let me get to know you, Ethan urged. Let's start fresh. You don't have to tell me everything today, but I want to be here for you moving forward. Just give me a chance. Henry's defenses seemed to waver for just a moment, and Ethan held his breath as he waited for a response. Okay, Henry said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll meet you again, but no questions about my past. I won't go there. Ethan felt a rush of triumph. Absolutely. No questions about your past. Just, let's meet again tomorrow? Same time? Fine, Henry replied, his tone still guarded but less hostile. But this doesn't mean I'm ready to open up, so don't get your hopes up. I wouldn't dream of it, Ethan said with a warm smile. Just having you agree to meet again is more than I could have hoped for. As they parted ways, Ethan felt a sense of purpose growing within him. He had taken a small step forward, a flicker of connection igniting between them. Perhaps this was the beginning of something meaningful, not just for Henry, but for himself as well. In the midst of the chaos of their lives, they had found a moment of clarity, a shared understanding that hinted at the possibility of healing. Ethan walked away from the park, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew there was still a long road ahead, fraught with challenges, but for the first time, he felt a sense of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, he could help Henry reclaim a part of himself that had been lost to the shadows. And in doing so, perhaps he could also discover something valuable about his own journey, something that had been missing for far too long. Ethan Parker sat on a weathered bench in Central Park, the cool breeze barely ruffling the crisp pages of the notebook on his lap. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the manicured lawns. He had arrived early, eager to meet Henry once more, but this time, he felt a palpable tension in the air. Their past few interactions had been laden with unspoken truths, and today, he sensed that something monumental was about to unfold. Henry arrived shortly after, his disheveled appearance still strikingly at odds with the elegance of the park. He shuffled over, the soles of his worn shoes barely whispering against the gravel path. Ethan's heart raced as he watched him approach. Henry's eyes, once filled with sorrow, now held a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even a hint of hope. Ethan had come to learn that in their short time together, Henry had become more than just a man on a bench. He was a living symbol of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure. "Hey, Henry," Ethan greeted, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within him. "Ethan," Henry replied, taking a seat beside him. He glanced at the notebook, the pages filled with Ethan's careful notes and observations. "You've been writing?" "Just some thoughts," Ethan said, closing the notebook and placing it beside him. "I've been thinking about our last conversation." Henry nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I didn't mean to shut you out. It's just difficult." "I understand," Ethan said gently, "but I want to help you. You don't have to go through this alone." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of laughter from children playing in the park. Ethan could see the turmoil in Henry's eyes, the battle between wanting to accept help and the fear of vulnerability. "I remember something," Henry said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "A family trip we took to the beach when I was a kid." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What beach?" he asked, intrigued. It was a little cove," Henry recalled, his brow furrowing in concentration. "We used to collect shells. You had this bright red bucket." The description struck a chord deep within Ethan. He could visualize it, the sun-drenched sand, the salty breeze tugging at their hair, and the sound of laughter echoing against the crashing waves. "I remember that," he breathed, the memory flooding back with vivid clarity. "My mom made us sandwiches. We played until sunset." Henry's eyes widened slightly. "You remember?" "Of course," Ethan replied, his heart racing. "I remember everything about that day, except you." The revelation hung in the air like a fog, heavy and thick. Henry shifted uncomfortably, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked at the frayed edges of his coat. "I was there, But it was a long time ago. A lot has happened since. Why did you never come back? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with a blend of confusion and longing. The pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed were slowly coming together, and he felt a mix of hope and dread. It's complicated, Henry said, his voice cracking. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? From what? Ethan pressed, desperation creeping into his tone. You're my father. I thought you were dead. At that, Henry's face crumpled, and the dam of emotions he had been holding back broke. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he turned away, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. I didn't want you to see me like this, he choked out, his voice barely audible over the noise of the park. I didn't want you to think I chose this life. Ethan's heart shattered at the sight of the man before him. His father, a ghost from his childhood, now reduced to this. But you didn't have to disappear. You could have fought for us. For me, he said, his voice rising with anger and pain. I tried, Henry exclaimed, his eyes blazing with a mixture of regret and sorrow. But life took a turn I never anticipated. I lost everything, my family, my purpose. I thought it was best to let you go. Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed with emotions. You didn't give me a choice. I grew up believing I had lost my father, that you had died. All those years, I searched for answers, for closure, for something. Henry's shoulders slumped, the weight of his past heavy on him. I know, son. I know. And I'm so sorry. I thought about reaching out so many times, but I was afraid of what you'd think of me. Think of you? Ethan echoed, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted to know you. I wanted to understand why you left. The silence that followed was deafening. The world around them faded into the background as father and son sat side by side, two souls connected by blood yet separated by time and circumstance. The weight of years lost hung between them, a bridge they were only beginning to traverse. Ethan, Henry finally said, his voice a fragile whisper, I never meant to hurt you. I was just a man trying to survive in a world that turned its back on me. I thought by leaving, I was doing what was right for you. What's right for me is knowing you, Ethan replied, his voice steady but filled with conviction. I want to rebuild what we lost. I want to understand your story, every painful detail. Henry looked at Ethan then, a glimmer of something, perhaps hope, flickering in his eyes. You really mean that? More than anything, Ethan said, placing a hand on Henry's shoulder. We can start fresh, together. The emotional barrier that had held Henry captive began to crack, and for the first time in years, he felt the warmth of connection. I've missed so much, he admitted, his voice trembling. I've missed you. Ethan leaned in, wrapping his arms around his father. The embrace was tentative at first, but then it solidified, a powerful reconciliation that spoke volumes about their shared pain and the possibility of healing. The world around them faded, and for that moment, it was just the two of them, father and son, facing the future together. As they pulled away, Ethan wiped the tears from his father's face. We have a lot to talk about, don't we? Henry nodded, a small, hopeful smile breaking through the remnants of his despair. Yes, we do. So many stories to share, so much to catch up on. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, it didn't seem insurmountable. They had found each other again, and in that rediscovery laid the foundation for a new beginning, one filled with hope, healing, and the promise of redemption. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.